In the year 1842, nestled within Georgia's thriving cotton domain, a woman governed her territory with the authority of a monarch who needed no consort. Elelonina Whitfield was her name, and her plantation sprawled across an endless horizon, cotton bolls gleaming like snow beneath the southern rays. Yet concealed behind those imposing white pillars and those polite Sunday expressions, Eleanor harbored a notion destined to tarnish her lineage permanently. When her spouse Thomas Whitfield was suddenly taken by fever, everything became Elelonina's possession: the acres, the wealth, and more than 200 enslaved individuals. Neighbors murmured that managing such a vast operation was unfitting for a woman alone. But Elelonina paid them no mind. She held firm that the Whitfields were marked for eminence, that their lineage was mightier, more refined, handpicked by the divine. Thus she dedicated herself to perpetuating that authority, regardless of whether it required twisting every natural and moral principle to achieve it. Each evening found her positioned before the hearth in her departed husband's workspace, examining his aged account books and a damaged likeness of her 5 female children. Each possessed beauty, stature, and fairness, yet Elelonina perceived an absence. "My elegance they have inherited," she would murmur, but his vigor eludes them. To her interpretation, vigor meant domination, command, supremacy, and before long she became consumed with identifying a method to strengthen her hereditary line. Existence on the Whitfield property proceeded with mechanical precision, outwardly at minimum. The enslaved labored from daybreak until the evening insects ceased their chorus. Overseers bellowed, cotton processing equipment rattled, and Elelonina observed from her elevated position, unmoved and statuesque. Among the laborers, one figure attracted notice, a person called Josiah. His stature surpassed all others, his shoulders powerful, his manner quiet, his stare capable of piercing through rock. He had arrived from Virginia years prior, possessing sufficient learning to interpret scripture, and recognized for his peculiar composure that made those watching him uncomfortable. When Elelonina initially observed him, neither attraction nor sympathy motivated her gaze. Only assessment. She remained silent that particular day, yet her observation extended beyond appropriateness. That evening, household staff exchanged whispers regarding the mistress's newly developed attention. "That tall one's been inquired about by Miss Elelonina," remarked an elderly woman named Ruth. Another shook her head. Nothing beneficial follows when a lady fixes her attention on one of us excessively. Yet the murmuring persisted. By the following month, Elelonina had directed the supervisor to reposition Josiah nearer, assign him reduced physical demands, bring him close to the primary residence. She justified this by citing his dependability, though everyone on the property understood that nothing Elelonina Whitfield undertook occurred without calculated purpose. Late one evening while the household slumbered, Elelonina positioned herself before her looking-glass, examining her appearance, her previously youthful attractiveness diminishing in the candle's glow. Her firstborn, Marianne, would shortly reach 17, matching Elelonina's age at her own wedding. That night she spoke quietly to herself. "The Whitfield designation must not diminish. I shall establish a mightier lineage. An impeccable lineage." She extended her hand toward her husband's aged portrait, tracing his features with unsteady fingers. "You failed to provide me a male heir," she whispered. "Yet I shall complete what you initiated." The scheme was crystallizing, dark, prohibited, unholy. The subsequent morning, Josiah received orders to present himself at the main house. He stood before Elelonina, perspiration gleaming on his skin following extensive field work. She examined him with silent intensity, then stated simply, "Henceforth, your labor falls under my personal direction. The overseer answers to me now." Josiah inclined his head without speaking. Behind his composed exterior, something stirred. Uncertainty or apprehension. Outside, wind swept across the cotton fields, transporting murmurs the household couldn't contain. The servants initiated discussions, and the supervisor avoided the mistress's eyes, because everyone at Whitfield Plantation understood one truth absolutely. When Elenina Whitfield fixed her determination on something, she never halted, not until achievement was hers. The tall individual she selected would become integral to a scheme beyond anyone's imagination. What commenced as fixation would transform into something more sinister and lethal. Subscribe, like, and share if you're prepared for the continuing installment of the Georgia Widow's Experiment. Previously we encountered Elenina Whitfield, the widow governing her Georgia plantation like a realm. But currently, her fixation with establishing an impeccable bloodline has directed her toward one individual, a tall, silent, enslaved laborer named Josiah. No one comprehended precisely what the widow intended, yet the manner in which she regarded him made everyone recognize it wasn't compassion. The summer of 1843 proved the most intense anyone could recollect. The atmosphere itself seemed weighted, as though it were withholding breath on a morning dense with moisture. Elenina summoned Josiah to the veranda. She occupied her tall-backed chair, a lace fan moving deliberately in her grasp, her female children observing from behind the window coverings. "You are Josiah," she uttered softly. "Yes," he responded, gaze lowered. "Reports indicate your strength, obedience, capacity for demanding labor." He inclined his head once, then she leaned forward, her tone piercing yet composed. "Starting today, your work will be near the residence. I'll have personal assignments for you. You'll execute them precisely as instructed." To any listener, this resembled advancement, but to Josiah, it carried warning. That night, as field insects shrieked from the crops, Josiah positioned himself outside the dwelling he shared with 3 others. He spoke little typically, yet others observed his muteness had deepened. Ruth, the senior household servant, approached with a bowl of stew. "Mistress supposedly has intentions regarding you," she murmured. "Exercise caution, boy. Favor from a white woman offers no security." Josiah remained silent. Yet internally he recalled his Virginia period when separation from his spouse and child occurred through sale. He had vowed never to be exploited again. Yet here he stood, selected not for benevolence, but for something beyond his comprehension. The following week, Eleanor directed Josiah to repair roofing adjacent to the parlor. From her elevated porch, she observed his climbing, perspiration gleaming across his back. Her firstborn, Mary Ann, approached her side. "Mama, why do you observe him?" Elenina kept her gaze forward. "A mother's selections require careful consideration, my dear. This household's future depends on vigor, not tenderness." Marianne's expression constricted. She didn't fully grasp, yet something in her mother's tone chilled her. That evening, she overheard servant whispers, and when she understood her mother's actual scheme, sleep abandoned her. A week later, Elenina commanded Josiah to serve wine at the family dinner, an unconventional request. The daughters sat mutely while their mother's attention lingered excessively. "Powerful hands," Elenina commented audibly, watching him pour. "Hands capable of molding destiny." Marianne dropped her utensil. The youngest, Clara, gazed wide-eyed at her mother. Following the meal, Eleanor dismissed everyone except Josiah. The corridor fell silent. The daughters listening from the stairway detected unhurried footsteps, the groan of a closing door. Then stillness. From that evening forward, Josiah became a presence throughout the main house. He repaired entrances, transported fuel, mended walls, perpetually near the mistress, never distant from her observation. The daughters ceased conversation during meals. Servants stopped laughing in the kitchen area. Even the supervisor now avoided the veranda, and nightly Elenina would occupy her husband's chair and inscribe in a dark leather notebook. On one page she had recorded in precise, flawless script, "The fresh Whitfield lineage will emerge from vigor." My daughters will carry forth greatness. One evening Josiah attempted to speak. No disrespect intended, but this, whatever you require from me, it's improper. Elelonina's expression solidified. You'll execute my instructions, Josiah. Your existence belongs to this household. You're part of it. Every aspect of you. He regarded her then, not as property, but as a man deprived of everything except his volition. No, he uttered quietly. My soul belongs to no one. That single statement suspended in the atmosphere like thunder. From that evening forward, Eleanor observed him differently, not with curiosity, but with rage. The next morning, the supervisor received orders to maintain stricter surveillance over Josiah. Yet whispers had already begun spreading across the region. A widow, an enslaved man, and a scheme so unnatural that even fellow planters feigned ignorance. By that summer's conclusion, every individual on the Whitfield estate recognized something dreadful was approaching. Elelonina's fixation turns toward her own daughters, and when she compels them to comply with her perverted design, the Whitfield inheritance will start disintegrating. Subscribe, like, and share to continue the true story-inspired saga of the Georgia widow's experiment. The summer sun had begun diminishing earlier each evening, and the Whitfield plantation seemed more hushed than previously. Yet beneath that quietness, something dark was spreading, like decay beneath polished timber. Elelonina Whitfield's gaze had lost any remaining warmth. Her every utterance now carried significance. Her every choice seemed premeditated. Her every glance toward Josiah heavy with meaning. The servants spoke less frequently. The daughters avoided their mother's eyes. Even the residence itself seemed to restrain its breath. Marianne, the firstborn, was the sole individual who dared challenge her. She had started sensing her mother's intentions, and contemplating them filled her with sickening dread. One evening, as candles flickered in the sitting room, Marianne attempted to speak. "Mother," she uttered softly. "The things you're demanding of him and of us, they are improper." Elelonina didn't raise her eyes from her writing surface. Her pen maintained its movement across the page, steady as her pulse. "What is proper," she stated, "is what maintains the Whitfield designation. What preserves our lineage's strength." Marianne stepped nearer. Yet at what expense? That caused Elelonina to halt. She rotated, her pale countenance illuminated by candle glow. "At any expense, child. The world seizes what it desires from the vulnerable. I won't tolerate vulnerability in my household." Marianne's throat constricted. For the initial instance in her existence, she feared her own mother. The subsequent morning, Elelonina summoned her daughters to the sitting room. The atmosphere was dense with moisture, magnolia fragrance drifting through the open entrances. Josiah stood silently near the veranda, his eyes lowered, yet his thoughts elsewhere. "My dears," Elelonina started. "You represent my pride, my existence's purpose. Yet this family must continue long after I'm gone. You must comprehend that we're selected for something greater, something beyond worldly understanding." Her second daughter, Louise, spoke nervously. "Mama, people are already discussing matters." "The minister's spouse mentioned," Elelonina's voice cracked like a whip, "the minister's spouse is foolish. Let her discuss. She comprehends nothing of destiny." The younger girls exchanged frightened glances. They had always followed her, always believed her wisdom absolute. Yet now, even they could perceive something in her eyes that no longer resembled faith. It resembled madness. That night, the elder sisters couldn't sleep. Marianne positioned herself at her window, gazing at the darkened fields, listening to cricket sounds. She could see Josiah walking alone, his form outlined by moonlight. When the household finally fell quiet, she descended the stairs cautiously. Outside, The atmosphere was heavy and alive with nocturnal sounds. She called his name in a whisper. Josiah. He halted without turning. She's unwell, Marianne said, her voice unsteady. She's losing herself. Josiah looked at her then, his face composed, yet filled with something profound and exhausted. I recognize it, he said. Yet she won't cease until someone makes her. Marianne's eyes brimmed with tears. Then she'll destroy us all. From that night forward, Marianne avoided her mother, yet Elelenina observed. The widow had become keener, harsher, more distrustful. She started keeping the girls near, never permitting solitary walks, never allowing private conversations. Every decision she made now centered on domination. She had the girls sized for fresh garments, all white, all uniform. She claimed it was for a family portrait, yet none believed her. And Josiah. He was trapped between dual existences. He was monitored constantly, ordered to labor only near the main house. He recognized escape was impossible now, not when Elelenina had positioned him at the core of her distorted vision. One evening, as the sky shifted to deep orange, Elelenina summoned Marianne to the study. On the desk lay her dark leather journal, its pages filled with precise handwriting. Read it, she directed. Marianne hesitated, then opened the volume. Her mother's words confronted her. A fresh line must commence. My daughters shall carry it. Josiah will serve as renewal's vessel. Her hand started trembling. Mother, you cannot intend this. Elelenina rose, her face pale and cold. It has already commenced, she uttered quietly. The Whitfields won't be forgotten. Marianne retreated, her voice fracturing. You're destroying us. Elelenina's expression remained unchanged. No, my dear. I'm preserving us. When Marianne fled the room, she rushed directly to the servants' quarters. She located Ruth and whispered through tears. She's completely mad. She'll exploit him. She'll exploit all of us. Ruth positioned a trembling hand on her shoulder. Child, she uttered softly. You'd better discover escape from this place. Your mother's already bartered her soul to darkness. That night, thunder rolled across the plantation and rain started falling forcefully against the ancient white columns. Inside the grand residence, Elelenina Whitfield sat isolated at her desk, inscribing one final line in her journal. The seed has been selected. The future approaches. If you wish to discover what occurs when Josiah ultimately rebels against the widow's perverted scheme and how Marianne risks everything to halt her, remain for the continuation of the Georgia widow's experiment. Subscribe, like, and share to follow the next chapter of this haunting true history-inspired story. The precipitation that had saturated the Whitfield plantation persisted for 3 days. When sunlight returned, the atmosphere felt transformed, hushed, weighted, and altered. Field laborers conversed in whispers, fearful their words might travel through the air and reach the mistress's hearing. The supervisor avoided the main house completely, asserting, Miss Whitfield doesn't require any man's guidance on proper conduct anymore. Yet by then, everyone recognized the truth. Something was wrong within that residence. Elelenina Whitfield had stopped attending religious services. Her daughters no longer visited town. The minister came once to call upon them. He departed pale and speechless, his scripture clutched firmly to his chest. And Josiah, the tall man at the center of whispers, had become a presence moving through the property. Men respected him. Women pitied him. And the mistress watched him like a predator. He'd learned to keep his eyes lowered, his mouth sealed, and his spirit concealed deeply. Yet internally, something was beginning to ignite. One night, as moonlight streamed through the tall windows of the main house, Marianne slipped quietly into the study. The dark leather journal lay open on the desk, as if anticipating her presence. She read her mother's latest entry, recorded in flawless ink. The blood must combine. The line must be renewed. I am chosen to accomplish this. Marianne felt the space tilt around her. She pressed her hand over her mouth to suppress crying out. She didn't notice her mother standing in the doorway. Elelenina's voice emerged sharp and cold. You've been reading what doesn't belong to you. Marianne turned, her heart pounding. What you're doing is insanity. Her mother walked closer, candlelight shifting across her features. Insanity, she uttered softly. What would you know? You're too young to comprehend what it means to construct something lasting. Marianne stepped back. You cannot exploit him, mother. He's a man, not livestock. Elelenina's hand struck her across the face before she could continue. The slap resonated through the house. Enough, Elelenina hissed. You will follow my instructions. You will comply. Marianne's eyes brimmed with tears, not from physical pain, but from the horror of recognizing that her mother genuinely believed she performed divine work. That night, she ran to the servant quarters, desperate. She found Josiah sitting alone, sharpening an aged blade used for cutting cane. She won't stop, Marianne whispered. She's lost her reason. She intends to force this abomination upon all of us. Josiah looked up deliberately. I recognize it. Marianne hesitated. Then we must flee. He shook his head. They pursue us. Someone like me doesn't simply walk away. Yet if we stay, she said, she'll destroy everyone. My sisters. You. Josiah looked at her with quiet sorrow. Then perhaps it's time someone stopped her. For an extended moment, neither spoke. The night was dense with crickets and distant thunder. Then Marianne uttered softly, if you attempt it, she'll have you killed. Josiah offered a faint, sad smile. Perhaps. Yet at least I'll perish standing. The next morning, rumors started spreading beyond the plantation. A trader in town mentioned hearing strange accounts about the Whitfield widow, that she'd lost her faculties and was mixing bloodlines. Others whispered that the family bore a curse. Neighbors started avoiding her road. Even the mail carrier stopped delivering correspondence. Yet Elelenina seemed unaffected by disgrace. She carried herself more proudly than before, her hair pinned impeccably, her eyes burning with certainty. When one of her daughters wept during supper, she calmly informed her, tears belong to the feeble. We are selected for something greater. That night, she directed the servants to prepare the sitting room for a ceremony. Candles were lit. Curtains drawn. The girls were made to wear their white garments. Josiah was summoned to the main hall. When he entered, the silence was suffocating. Elelenina stood before the grand fireplace, her daughters trembling behind her. She uttered softly, the time has come. Yet before she could continue, Marianne stepped forward. No, mother, she declared. This concludes tonight. The older woman's lips tightened. You forget your place. Marianne raised her voice, her hands shaking. You forget God. You forget decency, humanity, everything father represented. For a moment, Eleanor appeared stunned. Then her voice turned to steel. You will follow my instructions. I won't. Josiah moved then, slow and deliberate, positioning himself between mother and daughter. His voice was low yet firm. This house isn't holy. And your God wouldn't want this. Eleanor's hand trembled. Her jaw clenched. You dare speak to me of God? Yet Josiah didn't move. His eyes locked on hers. Calm. Steady. defiant. Something in that gaze broke her. For the initial instance, Lelanina Whitfield appeared uncertain. The candlelight flickered. And in that flicker, the daughters saw the woman who had raised them. Once proud, now consumed by her own fixation. No one moved. No one breathed. And outside, thunder rolled again, as if the heavens themselves were observing. Josiah reaches his breaking point. The night of escape begins, and the Whitfield legacy starts crumbling in blood and fire. Subscribe, like, and share to follow the next chapter of the Georgia widow's experiment. The rain returned that night, more intense than before, battering the ancient plantation like a celestial warning. Lightning illuminated the sky, revealing the columns of the Whitfield residence. Inside, the candles still burned from the interrupted ceremony. Wax dripped onto the floor, the atmosphere heavy with smoke and silence. Josiah stood in the corridor, his heart pounding. Upstairs, he could detect Lelanina's voice, low, furious, trembling with something between anger and insanity. "She's corrupted them," she hissed. "My own daughter has turned them against me." Marianne was confined in her room. Her sisters cried quietly behind their doors. Josiah recognized then that if he waited until daylight, someone would perish. He went to the rear stairs where shadows clustered. In the servant quarters, several men looked up when he entered. They saw the expression in his eyes and said nothing. He whispered, "The time has come. Tonight." They hesitated. Everyone understood the consequences for fleeing. Yet then an older woman, her hands roughened from washing, uttered softly, "I'll assist. The Lord's been waiting long enough on this place." They moved swiftly, silent as spirits. In the barn, they gathered what little they could. Bread. A water container. An aged lantern with minimal oil. Josiah severed the rope on one horse, whispering to soothe it. In her room, Marianne positioned herself at the window, rain streaking down the glass. She detected the faint creak of the rear door below, and her heart leaped. She pulled at her door's latch, whispering, "Please, please don't wake her." It finally yielded. She ran barefoot down the corridor, her nightclothes brushing the floor. Josiah waited at the entrance, soaked, lantern in hand. Their eyes met in the darkness. "You came," he uttered softly. "I wasn't staying," she whispered. "Not after what she's done." From upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Lelanina's voice called out faint yet sharp. "Marianne, where are you?" They froze. Thunder cracked, loud and violent. Then Josiah grasped her hand. "Now," he said. They dashed into the rain. Wind howled through the trees, the path slick with mud. Behind them, a window burst open. Lelanina's scream tore through the storm. "Traitors, both of you." The sound of her voice was swallowed by thunder, yet they both heard the fury within it. They ran past the fields, wet stalks striking their legs until the house became merely a dim shape in the distance. Josiah glanced back once and saw the mansion illuminated in lightning flashes, like a spirit observing their departure. Yet escape was never straightforward. By dawn, the hounds were released. The supervisor, red-faced and shouting, rode out with two companions. They carried firearms and followed the muddy tracks toward the woodland. Marianne could barely maintain pace. Her feet were bleeding, her garment torn. Josiah slowed just enough to support her. "We're close," he whispered. "A river lies ahead. If we cross it, we can conceal ourselves among the cypress." Yet they never reached that point. The hounds located them first, their howling echoing through the forest. Josiah spun around, pulling Marianne behind a fallen tree. He could see torchlight flickering through the rain. "Remain down," he said. The initial shot rang out, splintering bark inches from his head. Josiah didn't hesitate. He lifted the fallen branch like a weapon and moved toward the light. Marianne cried out, "No!" Yet he was already gone. There was shouting, another gunshot, then silence. She waited, trembling, her hands over her mouth. Minutes passed. Then through the trees, she perceived a shape limping toward her. Josiah, blood on his arm, his shirt torn, yet still standing. He dropped to his knees beside her, breathing heavily. "It's finished," he whispered. "We must depart before more arrive." They stumbled onward until they reached the riverbank. The water was high and violent, rushing with the storm's force. Marianne looked at him terrified. "We cannot cross that." Josiah stared at the raging current. "We have no alternative." He grasped her hand again and together they stepped into the freezing water. The current pulled at their limbs. Rain stung their faces, yet they didn't release each other. Behind them, torches reached the tree line. Voices shouted through the wind. Marianne looked back one final time and in a lightning flash she saw her mother standing at the woodland's edge, black cloak whipping in the wind. Elelonina Whitfield didn't move. She simply watched, her eyes hollow, her face pale as stone, and then in the river's roar and heaven's thunder, her children vanished into the dark water. Rain washed the footprints away. By morning the plantation stood silent once more. A grand house with no laughter, no songs, no prayers. Just one woman sitting alone at the window, staring toward the river that had taken everything she attempted to control. The curse of Whitfield House. Rumors spread across Georgia that the widow's mansion is haunted. Locals say they still hear screams in the rain. Subscribe, like, and share to follow the chilling conclusion of the Georgia widow's experiment. The storm had passed by morning. The sky over Georgia remained gray and low. The atmosphere heavy with the scent of wet earth and ash. The Whitfield plantation stood in silence. No servants in the yard. No sound of hooves. No voices calling across the fields. Just the wind creaking through the shutters and crows circling overhead. Inside, Elelonina Whitfield sat at the grand dining table, her hair undone, her dress still stained from the previous night. Candles had burned out hours before, leaving only wax trails down the polished wood. Her daughters huddled upstairs, terrified to descend. They had witnessed their mother's face upon her return, pale as death, eyes vacant, her lips repeating the same words endlessly. "They're gone. They're gone." No one dared address her. The servants who hadn't fled remained out of sight, crossing themselves when her footsteps echoed through the corridor. By dusk, word had spread to neighboring farms. 2 riders had observed shapes in the river, a man and a woman, swept away by current near the swamp bend. Their bodies were never recovered. The minister returned the following day, riding slowly, scripture in hand. He found Eleanor on the porch, staring toward the woods. "Mrs. Whitfield," he uttered softly. "You should rest." She didn't look at him. Her voice was distant, cracked. "I constructed something meant to endure. And the Lord removed it." The minister hesitated. "You constructed something the Lord never requested." Her head turned sharply then, eyes blazing for the initial time in days. "You comprehend nothing of what I constructed," she spat. "I attempted to preserve us, to purify what was diminishing." He stepped back, crossing himself. "You attempted to play God. That never concludes well." When he departed, she didn't observe his leaving. She simply sat there whispering to the wind. That night, thunder rolled again, distant this time, echoing like memory. The girls said they detected footsteps in the corridor, soft and slow. One of them swore she saw the tall shadow of a man pass by her door. Another claimed to hear her sister's name being whispered from the garden. By morning, Lelanina's bed was empty. They searched the house, the barns, the woods. Nothing. Only her aged Bible lay open on the table. A single line underlined in crimson ink. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. After that day, no one lived long at Whitfield House. 10 years later, travelers passing through said the windows were always open, though no one resided there. Local children dared each other to run up and touch the door, yet most wouldn't approach after sunset. Farm workers said they heard weeping on rainy nights, and sometimes a man's voice calling from the river. The house changed ownership 3 times. Each new occupant attempted to make it a home again, yet each departed within a year. Some said their livestock perished without explanation. Others claimed to see a pale woman standing by the upstairs window when lightning struck. One night, a young woman from town wandered too close. She later swore she perceived a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, standing by the ancient oak tree, his skin glistening as if still damp from rain. He turned, looked directly at her, and vanished when she blinked. Word spread. People stopped traveling that road after darkness. The Whitfield property was abandoned to decay, consumed by vegetation and silence. By the time Civil War arrived, the mansion was little more than a spectre. Soldiers camped near it once and fled by morning, claiming they'd heard screams from the walls. And thus the story became legend. They said the widow still walks the halls searching for her daughters. They said the daughters still call for the man who attempted to rescue them. And they said, on nights when the river floods, you can still see 2 shapes standing at its edge, a tall man and a young woman, hand in hand, looking back toward the house that condemned them all. No one knows if it's true. Yet if you journey to Georgia and discover a road lined with oak trees and ancient white stones, listen closely. When rain begins, you might hear a woman whispering through the thunder, the blood must combine. And if you hear that, run. The story of pride, obsession, and the curse left behind. If you felt the chill of history tonight, like, share, and subscribe for more forgotten stories the world attempted to bury.